So I had the pleasure of working with a colleague of Steve's at the Albright-Knox Museum on a medium piece about words like content, text, interpretation, curate, audience, and culture. And one word which tied up with all of that was voice. What are we saying to ourselves, and what are we saying to our visitors? Or as Steve said in his abstract, how can we talk to people in useful ways without trying to shout louder than everyone else? Or as he told me later over Slack, how we museums present ourselves externally in a crowded social media world when we're not A, a brand selling something, or B, an individual social media user as a person, navigating the many voices inside the institution and how the internal cultures they represent is a huge challenge for museums now. So Stephen Boyd is assistant editor in the publications department at the Albright-Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, New York, where his responsibilities include print and digital editing and project management, graphic and written style, brand and identity management, and social media content creation, strategy, and management. It's a lot of management. His academic background is in writing and editing with a BA and MA in English with a concentration on Irish literature from the University of Buffalo. After 4 years working in the retail, wine and spirits industry, focusing on marketing and consumer education, he traveled widely in Africa while living in various countries teaching English and computer skills in Namibia in 2011 and Tanzania from 2012 to 13. So please welcome Steve Boyd.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep this kind of light. It's been a long day. I'm hoping we can just kind of slide right into happy hour at 5 o'clock. So bear with me as we talk about institutional voice for about 20 to 25 minutes. Just to be clear, I'm going to be talking about institutional voice as it relates specifically to social media. I would love to have a presentation on institutional voice in written labels and content, and actually that's somewhat of Frith's presentation, so I don't have time to do that today, so I'm going to be focusing exclusively on social media. So take a minute and think about the ways that you talk to people on the internet. And by this, I mean platforms, not the ways in which you talk to people, not anything weird or comments on certain news articles. Just think about the ways you reach people on the internet. If you're like me, back in the early 2000s, you started on AOL Instant Messenger. You had a dial-up AOL connection. You probably spent many of your waking hours talking to people on AOL Instant Messenger. I still attribute my typing ability to having probably 10 or 12 Instant Messenger windows open at any time. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. The old dial-up connection, it was a magical sound. And then we went here. I still remember it was my freshman year in college when I was told to get on something called the Facebook. And at that point, it was still educational institutions only, so that really maintained the integrity of that platform and in its original form. It got a bit more sophisticated. We went from person-to-person communication on the AOL platform to a more direct sharing social media platform. You could argue that this was the birth of social media as we know it. I think obviously most people would. You could also, I guess, posit that this was the start of the culture of oversharing and internet stalking that we now have. So you take some and you lose some. And now, more or less, with a few additions and a few subtractions, we're here in terms of social media. These are just polls from my own feeds. I mainly use Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, usually only Twitter when I'm at conferences. So please do find me on Twitter. With certain exceptions, of course, there are other things like Snapchat and other platforms that I didn't include here. These are the things that have the most functionality that we use. Each one of them, interestingly, has a direct messaging function for that person-to-person communication that we started with AOL Instant Messenger. Of course, I don't think AOL Instant Messenger is it around anymore? I haven't seen anyone use it. It is around? Okay, I don't use it anymore. How many people use AOL Instant Messenger? It's coming back. Well, that makes my day a lot better. So these platforms are truly social. People are sharing. This is the start of, I would call, the sharing economy. We like to share our personal memories and things so that other people can see them, while also maintaining that direct messaging feature so that we can contact people. So now we've started putting all this stuff out there to talk to each other, but they're here too. And just to be clear, when I'm talking about brands, when I'm using the word brands, I'm going to be referring to them in terms of corporations, companies, and products, not branding from an institutional sense, just to make that distinction. But brands, they're here. They're all over the place. They're sticking up in things that we don't even know that they're there. That's my favorite one. And they're talking about things like this. They know that we are on social media. They know that they can reach us there. So they're trying to build brand loyalty. This is all a big marketing scheme. Brands want you to love them. They really do. They want you to interact with them. They want you to like their posts. They want to be where you are. They want to have your attention. And they're talking about things like this. They want to turn your likes into love for a product. It is a product. They figured out that social media is the key to your heart, your mind, your stomach. It's usually all of those things at once. And one of the most convincing arguments is, of course, to go where the people are. That's what we're doing. This is where they are. For the sake of an example, Facebook accounts for 1 in every 6 minutes spent online and 1 in every 5 minutes on mobile. And that's, I pulled from Hootsuite, and they have some skin in this game, so they're not going to fudge those numbers. These are real things. These are a lot of people on social media. Brands quickly figured out that if they wanted to be effective, they had to start acting like people. They had to maintain the personality, the charm of an individual person that you would want to be friends with if you could. Essentially, brands are trying to represent themselves as people. People you know and love, but as we know, they're not people. They're made up of people trying to sell you things. They want you to think that they're your friends, and it's an illusion, I hate to tell you. Some brands try to get you a couple different ways. They try to adopt a very indulgent tone. You deserve this. Buy this. Treat yourself. That was my favorite, that I could work that in there. Others want you to know how cool they are. They get it. They know where you're from. They know what to say to you, like the Seamless ad targets people in New York City. If you look up, a lot of their ads target people around and in New York City in ways that only people in and around New York City would understand, like things like if you want to live, move out to Jersey, things like that. They want you to know how cool they are. They get it. They know you. They know your concerns. They know what you're thinking about. But brands are on social media to sell you things. They're not people. We've covered this before. They reinforce one image and generally use one voice. If you spent time with an actual person who did that, you would not want to spend time with that person for very long. And this is my favorite graphic that I've ever found, by the way. I'm just going to leave that up there for a minute. I couldn't believe I found it. I came across it the day before I had to send this in, and I was like, well, that's perfect. Now, we are museums. We have more than one voice. This aligns perfectly with everything that we've heard so far today. Museums are made of people. Museums have people because people act differently in different situations, therefore so can museums. Brands want you to forget they're people. They're hiding behind one message. They're trying to sell you something. They want people to remain invisible so that their sales pitch is really the only thing that you see, because we have so many people, we can act differently in different situations. In the museum field, we call this institutional voice. This is what we try to cultivate on social media. This is what makes us dynamic and interesting. And again, I'm referring here to social media institutional voice. It's the way that we present ourselves on social media through the tone that we adopt, the words that we use, the style of posts that we create and use. Institutional voice is mediated in that we create it. It's reviewed normally before it's put up. It's not really a stream of consciousness type of thing. Whenever you post on social media, it goes through a period of mediation because you have to think it and then write it and then post it. Institutional voice on social media includes things like promotion, marketing, curatorial content, conversations and questions, museum competitions and campaigns. Here I'm thinking of things like Museum Selfie Day, all of those things that we participate in across the board that we as museum people typically end up talking to each other with our followers kind of watching and sometimes wondering what the hell we're doing. Events, we talk about a lot of things like events, education, sometimes jokes and cats. Museums, as our director at the Albright-Knox is fond of saying, are many things. We end up being a lot of different types of businesses. We are retailers, we are book publishers, we are restaurateurs, we are educational resources, we are educational institutions. So how do we represent all of these things by a few social media posts? We also play games, we make jokes. Again, we are people, we have senses of humor. Therefore, our institutional voice can be, and I would argue should be, friendly. We have to be able to talk to people in a way that does not make them want to not be friends with us. Irreverent, that would sort of work for us as an institution that has a very strong representation in terms of being an authority figure. We want people to know that we have senses of humor. We are not afraid of making fun of ourselves or making fun of museums as a whole. I think we all can do that, especially on an afternoon like today. We can be hilarious, as hard as that is. I'm not a hilarious person, unfortunately. I think it comes from situation and context, but you can afford to try to make jokes. If they work, they work. If they don't, they don't. We can be inviting. We want to invite people in. We want to talk to them. We want them to talk to us. We, of course, want to be educational. Typically, that refers back to our mission and vision. We want to be educational institutions. We want to be timely. We can refer to things as they happen. I'll talk a little bit more about this. And jokes and cats, of course. Since we cover such a wide range of topics, an effective institutional voice is, by definition, multiple voices. When more than one person manages an account, as happens at my institution, and I would say that many people probably have this as well, the voice can differ because you have two different people, or more than two different people in some cases. I would say that the most effective way to manage that is to set high and low parameters for what you will and will not do. For example, one of mine is I will not use emoji. I just won't do it. I've seen it done, and I don't agree with it, and you can argue your case if you want to, but that is my low bar. I won't do it. So if you ever see an Albright-Knox post that has an emoji in it, it was not me. And then if you argue up to maximum, it was probably Kelly. If you argue up, I would say stay away from using profanity or anything that would turn off your audience. Mainly keep true to your authentic voice as your institution. An effective institutional voice means that we can post about a number of different things, like Mr. Picasso, memes, try to sprinkle those in as much as possible, events like classes and tours and things that every museum does and will inevitably want to promote and talk about, events like music series, performances, lectures, things that, again, museums do all the time. Again, we are an event venue. We have many things that we like to promote to people, and we want them all to come and see our things. We can share information about all of these things without becoming unhinged because we have an effective institutional voice that allows us to represent all of the programs and things that we do. So the question always comes back to, who is our audience? This is the big question that I've heard people say at MCN before, and it's a big question that I've thought a lot about when I'm having existential crises. Why are we on social media? Why are we here in the first place? We know that's where the people are, that's why the brands are there, but what are we doing there? Who are we talking to, and what are we selling? We're selling the experience of the museum. We all know that being in the physical building has a certain level of experiential value. We're selling the one on the left, which I would argue is the main having a moment with art experience that we all know and love. But we're also selling these peripheral images, having lunch at the cafe, having an art class, going on a tour, shopping in the shop, experiencing art on your own terms, perhaps as a creator of art yourself, or as an art class. And these are all photographs from things that we do every day at the Albright-Knox Art Gallery. We're talking to everyone. To go back to the question about audience, the ideal institutional voice both talks to everyone and includes everyone as much as possible. It should be open and inviting, not exclusionary. That means, going back to that seamless ad, we should not try to exclude people based on geography. We want everyone to have a similar experience with our institutional voice. We can have conversations and answer questions. Hopefully we can do that every day when possible. I do think that an effective social media voice asks as many questions as it answers so that we can have dialogue with our followers. Unlike brands, we can be personal. We have personalities. We might have more than one, and that's completely okay. One of the things that I remember hearing at MCN last year that has stuck with me is that social media is not a Band-Aid or a bullhorn. So we don't want to shout too loudly, but we need to talk with enthusiasm about the things that we do so that people will understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. What can an effective social media institutional voice accomplish? One of my favorites is to go viral. I usually think that people don't actually know what that means if they're asking us to do that. It's just such a hard thing to do. It's virtually impossible. I think it's luck. Make people think we're funny and cool. I would argue that may or may not actually deserve a place on this list, depending on what your definition of social media institutional voice is. Associate us with their personal brand. This is one that I've heard before. We want people to make your museum or your institution part of their brand so that they associate with you. Inspire people to donate money. We are in the midst of a capital campaign at the Albright-Knox Art Gallery, and I've been told by our advancement department that everything we do is a potentially fundable opportunity. So I think that social media does go a long way because it reaches people where they already are. If they choose to donate money, fantastic. Make people want to visit the museum. This is the one in red. This is the one that I'm not sure of. Do we want people on social media to translate into visitors in the door? I think yes. I think that could be a topic for its own presentation at some point. And this is a question that, again, I've heard asked many, many times. We do want people to come in the door, of course, but what if they are in another country? How do we translate that social media institutional voice to give our visitors a similar experience, whether it's digital or in person? The way that we present ourselves as museums on social media is always and must be an invitation for people to visit, even if they do not come or are unable to come. It's like we're asking them out. The way that we present ourselves is a pitch. It's a sales pitch for them to come, to engage with us, to follow what we're doing at any level that they feel comfortable with, so that they will hopefully interact with us again and maybe visit. I have to say, I added these before I knew about Gavin Mallory's Ignite talk yesterday, and as it was happening, I was like, this is absolutely perfect. So does the tone of our institutional voice on social media have to match our printed text and labels? This is the question. If you see one thing online, if a museum has a certain personality, whether that's on Twitter or on Instagram or on Facebook, do you expect that to happen in the same way when you come into the museum? So your social media voice is one thing, your museum voice would be another? No. Is this like a bad Tinder date? This was the question that plagued me as I was writing this presentation. We all know that on Tinder you can present yourself as, well, I don't know, but some people do, that you can present yourself a certain way and then you can be perceived that way, but then when you actually interact with the person who's presented themselves that way, they might not match it. And I'm amazed that I could work this into the presentation too. I was really happy about that. The long answer is no, no. Because institutional voice should focus solely on the platform in which it is encountered. And it should focus only on enhancing that visitor's experience in whatever form that takes. So no matter where it takes place, you want to be focused on the visitor's experience, whether that's online, on either Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media platform you're using, or in the museum itself. The museum voice can and should be different from the social media voice because it's in a different setting. You don't have the same sets of expectations as you do when you're browsing on your phone, when you're perhaps on a train, or standing in line at the grocery store as you do when you're standing in front of an artwork. Social media followers and visitors want and possibly need different things at different times. As Frith's talk highlighted, people want to read labels at certain times, they don't want to read them other times, and they want to encounter content in ways that are comfortable and understandable to them given the circumstances. All voices that we use on social media represent the institution. They have to, and by definition, they do. Institutional voice should focus only on the visitor's experience. Now this one I invented. You're not going to find this term anywhere. I think it refers to things that you've probably heard about before. It also sounds like a really cool band name. What I call Tonecreep happens when a prevalent discourse enters into our society and is adopted or co-opted with mixed results by brands and advertisers. This is when you start to see people using slang words. There's a wonderful Twitter account that I encourage you to check either right now or later called Brand Saying Bay. It's spelled just like it sounds. The one on the right is one example of a multitude of examples of social media use gone wrong by brands who either did not know how to use it or were told incorrectly by their young advisors, perhaps. This is my favorite one. So you can see on the bottom that IHOP was trying something. I don't know how well it worked, but the folks over at Brand Saying Bay had a really nice time with it, and this sort of summarizes the entirety of the messaging of my talk. I could have just put this up there and been done. In some cases, tone creep can lead to a deliberate lowering of the discourse. It changes the way that you talk to people. Goes back to brands trying to win your trust by being indulgent or being cool. We as museums have worked very hard to establish our institutional voice and to make it trustworthy and to make it authentic. This tweet again at the bottom is probably the second part of the summary that I could use for this talk. Reminder that brands are not your friends. Brands are not people. A brand does not feel sadness or empathy. We do. We have people who work in our museums every day. We know our collections, we know our geographic locations, and we know our followers. I could have written this tweet on the bottom. I didn't, but it happened to be perfect for what I'm trying to say here today. Another thing to be careful of with institutional voice is what I'm calling public focal points. By this, I mean things that happen in the public discourse that dominate everything on social media. I guess you could call them trending topics. The examples that I had in mind are the unfortunate deaths of a number of very famous and beloved musical icons this year. I hate to bring it up, but those became very visible focal points for a lot of brands, specifically Prince, everything turned purple. David Bowie, everything turned into Starman, whether that was acceptable or not. So my advice and my thoughts on this are don't co-opt this public sentiment and try to stick your voice in where it doesn't belong. We at the Albright-Knox had our tribute to Prince. We turned our logo purple on Twitter, and that was all that we did. I thought that was fitting. It wasn't too much, it wasn't too little. It showed that we were paying attention. We knew what was going on. We had our own thoughts and feelings on it, and it was an authentic reaction at that moment, and we didn't premeditate it. It just sort of seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Brands don't have this kind of empathy. They're trying to sell you something. So when Maker's Mark turns its wax on the top of its whiskey bottles purple in honor of Prince, they're trying to sell you bourbon, which is fine with me. I'm probably going to buy it anyway. You don't have to turn it purple. But it's a blatant attempt for them to try to weigh in on this public focal point. Museums certainly can be empathetic as long as we stay true to who we are and the people who work at our museum. So to review, we're made of people. This is the theme that we've talked about all day. This is the theme that was introduced last night, and luckily for me, this lined up perfectly with my talk. People have different personalities, and an effective institutional voice represents a diverse institution with many personalities and voices. Everyone who works at your museum is a part of your institutional voice, whether they are posting on social media or not. So here's what you can do to work out your institutional voice. Follow your institution on social media. I know this is not the crowd, but when you go back to your institutions, please promote your social media channels. It always boggles my mind how many people don't know that we have a Twitter account, that we use Instagram. I'm talking sometimes about our administration, unfortunately. So put that out there. Evangelize your social media platforms as much as possible. If you manage them, tell everyone to follow them. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers, tell them to tell their families. We often have all staff meetings once a month where we will get up and shamelessly plug everything that we're doing on social media just so that people know it's happening. Whether they choose to interact with us is their choice, but we just want them to know that it's happening. Even if you don't work on digital or social projects, start thinking about the voice that represents you or represents the institution to you. As we've heard before, everyone has an idea of what their institution is, and the mission statement means something different to everyone. It all ties back to the job of the institution. And start conversations with your digital or web colleagues. If you're not working on digital projects, if you're not managing social media, go talk to the people who are. I am sure that they will be happy to talk to you. I, as a social media manager, love hearing different people come up to me and give us ideas, give us thoughts, give us feedback, because A, it means that they're paying attention, which I very much appreciate, and B, it means that they are engaged with the institution on a level that means we can more effectively talk to our audiences. Thank you very much, and it's happy hour.